I think we'll probably get underway. We might still have people joining us in due course, but I think we should get started because we have a lot to get through and a limited amount of time. Can I just remind everyone, if you're not speaking, if you can just make sure your microphone is muted, so we minimize any background sound or inadvertent F's and bleeps as we discuss the disciplinary processes within the Labour Party and so forth. So my name is Paul O'Connell. I teach law at the School of Oriental and African Studies in London, and I'm chairing tonight's event. So I'll try and say as little as possible, but I'll just very quickly introduce it. I want to thank Red Labour for having the courage and the conviction to put this event on. As you all know, the subject of this evening's event is free speech for the few or the many. And it's a crucially important event and a crucially important topic. Obviously, the immediate catalyst for it was the completely unwarranted suspension of Jeremy Corbyn from the Labour Party. But the broader background context has been the confected campaign alleging systematic anti-Semitism within the Labour Party that has raged for the last 4 or 5 years, and how this has been cynically weaponised by opponents of Jeremy Corbyn, opponents of the left of the Labour Party, to attack them. So we're going to introduce a number of different speakers. We're going to cover a whole range of topics, and then there'll be time and space for questions at the end. So without further ado, I will introduce the first speaker, who is Andrew Feinstein, who is a former Member of Parliament for the African National Congress in South Africa, who is also an authority on anti-Semitism and the history of the Holocaust, and who has been scurrilously attacked for his views on the anti-Semitism crisis within the Labour Party. So Andrew, you've got 3 minutes, and I'll try and give you a 1 minute sort of heads up as we get around to it.
Thanks so much, Paul, and great to be here and to see so many wonderful comrades on the call. And second of all, my apologies. We're celebrating my son's birthday this evening, so I'm going to have to speak and then join the celebration. So please forgive me for that. The first thing I'd just like to say is how extraordinary it is that within the Labour Party, we are supposedly not allowed to question the EHRC report, which is profoundly flawed and has been misrepresented across the mainstream media. The EHRC report process, hello?
I'm not sure what happened there. I fear we may have lost Andrew. If it's okay, and if it's okay with you, Jane, we might proceed to the next speaker and then let Andrew back on if we can get him reconnected. Are you okay to speak now, Jane?
That's fine, yes. Thank you, Paul.
So our second speaker is Jane Haybrook, who is a barrister specialising in immigration law, and also somebody who likewise was scurrilously attacked for taking a principled stance on the allegations of anti-Semitism within the Labour Party. So Jane, again, 3 minutes.
Thank you very much indeed. Yes, I'm Jane Haybrook, as you've heard, and you probably know me better as Clément Communard on Twitter, or the Buddhist barrister with the big mouth. I've never hidden who I am. As you probably all are aware, I was sued for libel this year, not for anything I had said myself, but for retweeting an article about 2 Jewish celebrities, which actually had very little to do with anti-Semitism at all. The article itself was concerning allegations that these celebrities had attacked a 16-year-old Labour activist. The interesting thing about it, however, was that from the very start, it was framed in the media as being about anti-Semitism. And in fact, I ended up being called an anti-Semite by, is his name Mike Walker? Somebody on Talk Radio anyway, said, well, if you're being sued by Rachel Riley, it's because you're anti-Semitic. That was the extent to which the levels of discourse had fallen at that stage. I got a little bit robust with him, and sure enough, the following morning he'd deleted that tweet. But part of the issue is that this is becoming a common problem, and it's not just a common problem in the UK. It's actually very, very rife in the States, where not just public figures, but also politicians and even corporations will sue people who criticise them, whether that criticism is valid or not, whether it actually amounts to a libel or not. That's something that they call strategic litigation against public participation. And as part of being sued myself, as you heard earlier, I'm an immigration lawyer. I know nothing about libel, or I didn't. I know a good deal more about it now, believe me. I started looking into this issue of what they call SLAPs, strategic litigation. One of the most famous purveyors of this is Donald Trump, who will sue anybody who criticises him, including CNN, including reporters at CNN, etc., etc. And it is a worrying development in libel law that politicians are using it, or political people are using it to shut up political opponents. We really are in a world where, 1 minute left, we really are in a world where libel law is for the wealthy. If you're not a wealthy person, you are going to be forced into perhaps making admissions that you don't want to make if you can't afford or don't have the strength and courage to fight that. I'm glad I fought it. I'm glad we settled, and I'm glad that they ended up paying a sum of money to my legal fees, but it still left me very much out of pocket.
Thank you very much, Jane. And again, I'm sure most of you are familiar with Jane's experience. And Andrew, thankfully, is back on, so we'll reintroduce Andrew to continue what he was going to say. But just briefly to add on to what Jane has said there, this is also part of a broader process of what we sometimes call lawfare, which again is the use of law in different ways to fight political battles. And the IHR definition of what constitutes anti-Semitism, specifically the 11 examples that are given, is a core part of this. Again, within the UK, long before the most recent events, 84 BME NGOs and rights groups wrote a letter warning that this would have this chilling effect, specifically on criticism of Israel's crimes in Palestine. And again, we see this is one of the important things about tonight's event and about freedom of expression. Of course, we're all here because I'm sure we all support Jeremy Corbyn, but the defense of Jeremy Corbyn today is about much more than Jeremy Corbyn the individual. It's about defending the right to stand up for Palestinians in solidarity, to make arguments about realism, and to defend socialism in Britain more generally. So Andrew, if you'd like to pick up where you left off.
Thanks, Paul. I'm not quite sure what happened there. I was just about to say that the EHRC report is unapologetically part of a process of the weaponization of anti-Semitism to thwart a threat to the establishment. And that threat is, on the one hand, Jeremy Corbyn, to prevent him from achieving the highest political office in the land. But as Paul has just said, it is also a far broader and more profound threat than that, in that our movement is seen as the threat. Our movement for socialism, for justice and equality, our movement for support for the Palestinian people in the face of the illegal and brutal occupation. In fact, what the EHRC report is part of a process that the Palestinian academic Edward Said described as power repeating untruths until they have the force of truth. And I have to say that in this particular instance, it is reprehensible and appalling for those many of us on this call and in the wider society whose families actually suffered the horrors of the Holocaust, to see their suffering used in this way as a reactionary political tool is nothing short of repulsive. The final aspect of this extraordinary moment in Labour Party and British history that I wish to touch on is that while people like Margaret Hodge, who profited personally and materially from her family companies acting as a commercial agent for the apartheid South African regime, for people like Hodge and her ilk to be able to say whatever they want to say about whomever they want to say it, while progressive Jews and even Orthodox Jews who support Jeremy Corbyn, either in the eyes of the EHRC and in the eyes of the Labour Party, we don't exist, or if we insist on being noisy, we are treated with disdain as the wrong kind of Jew. So these people have given themselves the right to decide who is and who is not the right kind of Jew. And this denies the diversity of the Jewish community. It denies the hundreds of years of Jewish socialism, of critical Jewish intellectual thought, and the incredible rich diversity of that thought. You know, at the same moment in South Africa, the Russian emigre and communist Joe Slovo led the ANC's armed wing, Umkhonto we Sizwe, at exactly the same time that another South African Jew, Percy Utah, was prosecuting Mandela and asking for the death sentence for him. That is the breadth of opinion in the Jewish community. And who are these reactionary forces to deny that? Let me, in conclusion, say that this is indeed a shameful chapter in the Labour Party's history, but not for the reasons that the mainstream claim, but because the party, led by a lawyer supposedly trained in human rights, has defiled the suffering of Jews, including the 39 members of my mother's family who died in Auschwitz and Theresienstadt, has created a repulsive hierarchy of racism, which means that the Labour Party, as reflected by its leader, is no longer an anti-racist party. He has shut down democracy and the freedom of speech in the party. But let me say finally, we will not be silenced. We will not be cowed. We will not allow our history and our suffering to be abused. Because as the revolutionary activist and writer Victor Serge said, after all, there is such a thing as truth.
Thank you very much, Andrew, for that powerful contribution. I think Andrew touched on some of the really crucial issues here. He's also, and Andrew, somebody who is an authority on this and having lived through it as well, mentioned apartheid. And of course, many of you will know that in the last week, another young Labour member who, when she was even younger, when she was 18 or so, tweeted saying that Israel is an apartheid state, which is an incontrovertible fact. Palestinian human rights NGOs, Israeli human rights NGOs, the UN, any expert worth their salt around the world who works on the question of apartheid has said the same thing. But a complaint has been made that this was an anti-Semitic statement. Now, what comes with that complaint remains to be seen, but the important point, and both Andrew and Jane have touched on this, is the chilling effect that this whole process has had. The attempt to intimidate people into forcing them to say what they know to be untrue for fear of the consequences of saying what they know is true. And that is a real issue. Last year, some of you will know this, mid-last year, Tower Hamlets Council refused to facilitate a protest in support of Palestinians because they were afraid they'd be accused of anti-Semitism. Now, these are the real concrete impacts of allowing this concept, this definition of anti-Semitism in the IHRA definition be weaponized. But also, just to reiterate what Andrew said, which I think is really important, the people who cynically push this don't care about anti-Semitism in any way, shape or form. They don't care about the genuine suffering of Jewish people and Jewish communities historically and today. They care about cynically deploying this to score political points. Just a quick reminder to everybody, if you're not speaking, can you make sure your microphone is on mute just so we don't get any background noise? I want to introduce our next speaker now, who is Low Key, who's he's for a long time now a very prominent campaigner on the questions of the rights of Palestinians, also against the Iraq War and the consequences of British and American imperialism in the Middle East. He's also a rapper, a writer, and just an overall excellent activist. So Low Key, if you want to take it away for 3 minutes, and then after Low Key speaks, I'll have a quick conversation with Low Key and a few questions to go over with him.
Wow, thank you very much for that very generous introduction. Firstly, I am not a supporter of the Labour Party. as it has behaved in my lifetime and even across the last century. However, I saw in Jeremy Corbyn a break in the bipartisan orthodoxy of neoliberal necro-politics that had taken hold of the British political class since the 70s. That is to say, policies which lead to people dying, whether it was the Iraq War or austerity, which, according to Professor Danny Dorling of Oxford University, had been responsible pre-corona for the death of 130,000 people. Now, today, we find ourselves, those of us who went door to door and who went out on the street to support sweeping Jeremy Corbyn into number 10 Downing Street, we find ourselves in a position where many Labour MPs who probably got elected on the basis of them being part of the Jeremy Corbyn movement and sweep are not doing anywhere near enough to support him. We also see on Have I Got News For You, the BBC programme, a comedian by the name of Finn Taylor joking about bombing all of us. How did we get to this point where people, as Paul so correctly put it, are scared to say what they know is true because of the ramifications of such a thing? Jeremy Corbyn was absolutely correct to say that 0.3% of the membership of a party being accused of something has to be overstated for the public to view it as representative of 1/3 of the membership. 1/3 of the party's membership would have been at least 200,000 people. Now, how do you make 0.3% of a membership look like 200,000 people? And besides that, 0.3% of the membership would not have been the crisis that they made it out to be in any way, shape, or form. But who it was a crisis for were, and I can't speak obviously on all of the cases, but many of the cases of which I personally know the details of were just as oppressive as and manufactured as the case against Jeremy Corbyn. Now, those cases have not only led to people losing membership of the Labour Party, they have led to people losing jobs. And at least one case that I know of has led to a person attempting suicide. There have been death threats targeted towards people. And it makes you think of that cynical inclusion of the number for the Samaritans included in letters. I also think of my friend Maz Salim, whose own father was killed by a neo-Nazi, who herself was suspended from the Labour Party for retweeting me. And the tweet that she was suspended for retweeting, it read in the following way: Zionism is a form of racism and racial discrimination. UN General Assembly Resolution 3379. So here we have a person who has lost their father to Nazi violence, retweeting a UN resolution, and that is deemed a punishable offence. I stand with Jeremy Corbyn, as I would stand with Mark Wadsworth, Chris Williamson, Maxine Peake, and somebody such as David Miller, who merely pointed to the fact of a donation to Keir Starmer's campaign from a particular figure within the pro-Israel lobby. What is happening here is serious and must be organized against clearly. You cannot appease your way out of this.
Thank you very much. Okay, again, all excellent points. Just for anyone who's joined, so the running order we're going to do now, I'm going to have a quick conversation with Loki. We've got a few questions that we want to ask him about his activism and sort of how that relates to tonight's discussion. And then we're going to move on to a panel. We've got a panel of excellent speakers, and we'll take questions in from the audience who's watching it. Just to echo some of what Loki has said there as well, though, it's really crucial. And again, I'm not member of the Labour Party. I couldn't be. It's not, for a whole variety of reasons. I don't agree with the politics of the Labour Party. I did, however, campaign for Labour MPs in the last election because, again, with Jeremy Corbyn and with the offer that he was making to the public in terms of an alternative, however limited, an alternative to what we've had for the last 20 years, was worth fighting for. And I think it's really important to understand what's happening now, again, as not just being about Corbyn the individual. It's about killing off the idea of an alternative, the idea that we could do things differently. and restoring the status quo within the Labour Party on behalf of the British state and British capital. So that's a crucial point. And I will just finally echo Loki's point as well. For me, one of the fundamental problems has been the left of the Labour Party in particular conceding too much ground on this over the last 5 years, whether it was on Chris Williamson's case or any other number of cases. Every time the left of the Labour Party, in the interests of appearing to be responsible or respectable, gave ground on these unfounded allegations, it fed the fire of this campaign. Bob Crow, who was a great trade unionist, who many of you probably know, he had this old expression, if you keep running, they'll keep chasing you. And that was the problem. The Labour left kept running, including Corbyn and the people around him, and we have to learn that lesson going forward. So Loki, I've got a couple of questions that the organisers have sort of put together just to ask you about the work you've been doing. I know some of it, we cross paths occasionally in SOAS, we're both at a base. So would you tell us a bit about your activism on behalf of the rights of Palestinians and so forth?
Well, I'm the same as many hundreds of thousands of people across this country. We were energized and mobilized when we saw Operation Cast Lead, not just on a local level, but I was fortunate enough to be part of one of the Viva Palestina convoys to Gaza. And of course, I've been lucky enough to visit the West Bank as well.
You very much. And to connect it up to the debates we're having now, like yourself, and possibly in part because of backgrounds, I know your family from Iraq, and my sort of own Irish background is a natural affinity in some ways with the anti-imperialist struggles and with the Palestinian people. In terms of what's happening in Labour right now, what you've touched on it already, but what sort of drew you to Corbyn and Corbyn's project? Again, like myself, you're not a member, but still could support what Corbyn was doing. And what drew you to that? And then why do you think the fight for freedom of expression is so important at the minute within Labour and beyond it as well?
Well, as you would have known as somebody at SOAS, the Justice for Workers campaign had few allies really in Parliament. And when they succeeded in getting union recognition, they found that the outsourced company, in collaboration with SOAS, worked to deport several of them and punish them for gaining union recognition. Well, who did the Justice for Workers campaign? A small group of people at SOAS organizing. Who did they find a friend in? They found a friend in Jeremy Corbyn. So even on that micro level, in terms of issues that I cared about, in terms of issues where I directly viewed there to be an importance in the winning of those battles, it was Jeremy Corbyn that came to the side of people who needed him, really. So and also I would say that Danny's piece later on definitely speaks for me also, in terms of seeing Jeremy Corbyn as a complete break from that a political class which does not assimilate criticism, an establishment which does not assimilate and adapt to criticism of it in any meaningful way.
Brilliant, thank you. And would you just elaborate on that last point about the criticism? Because I think that's the crucial point about the importance of freedom of expression and sort of how that ties into this. That again, it's about not just criticism, it's about speaking truth. You know, there's a sort of well-worn liberal platitude about speaking truth to power, which usually just involves telling Piers, whatever his name is off the television, that he's a clown. Telling Piers Morgan that he's a clown. But when actually thinking about defending the rights of Palestinians, standing up to British imperialism, making those arguments, that's a truth now that's become taboo. So would you say a little bit about freedom of expression and the importance of it now in the context of this fight as well?
Well, the 10 pledges from the Board of Deputies, pledge number 5, if I remember correctly, says that if you provide platform for somebody who has been suspended or expelled from the Labour Party, then you should be suspended from the Labour Party. Now, what that led to is a situation where Diane Abbott happened to give a speech on a call that people who were in the audience at some point had been expelled from the Labour Party in this farcical debacle. Now, people were calling directly after that for Diane Abbott to be expelled or suspended merely by speaking and having people in the audience who had been suspended. There's even, as far as I understand, examples where denial of the accusation can then lead to suspension. What about this is fair? What about this is good faith? What about this is good faith? And in fact, the methods like that, denialism leading to expulsion, or speaking on this in the same vicinity as someone, that reveals that this is not good faith in the way it's carried out.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And thanks very much for raising that question of good faith, because I think that is crucial and is a crucial misconception. This shouldn't need saying, but all of us, those of us who are socialists and communists, anarchists, whatever people happen to be specifically, we all are committed anti-racists in different ways. So it shouldn't have to be said that if there is, when there are genuine instances and cases of anti-Semitism, that we'll all be there. When the neo-Nazis are swabbing synagogues up in North London, it's working class trade unionists and socialists out there defending it, not these people on social media who weaponize anti-Semitism and smear it. And the problem with a lot of the Labour left, and it even happened now when Corbyn was suspended, sections of the Labour left who are friends of his, and I wouldn't want friends like them in a fight with me, to be honest. They keep saying we need to get back and get unity of the party and get this behind us and move on, not understanding that they're not involved in a good faith debate with people about how best to defeat anti-Semitism. They're dealing with people who are out to break their legs and will use any method to do it, and will cynically deploy anti-Semitism to do it. I think that's a really important point. Just to pick up on something Loki said, because this is important as well about solidarity and about the type of politics we're all engaged in. The Justice for Cleaners movement, which ran for 15 years at SOAS and is still now fighting SOAS management. Important to point out that when we organised a campaign 2 years ago to protest against Mark Regev being invited to speak at SOAS, the Justice for Cleaners campaign were there with us every step of the way, supporting the opposition that we showed, that even though SOAS management, with their rhetorical commitment to decolonisation, still invited the spokesperson for a settler colonial state onto campus and spent thousands on security for him. So that solidarity is crucial, and it cuts right across the board. So thanks again to Loki for raising that. Do you have any final words, Loki, before we go into the panel?
I would just say, let us remember the case of Dareen Tatur, who was the Palestinian poet who was imprisoned by the Israeli occupation for her poem. It was called Qawim Ya Sha'bi Qawim, Resist My People. Now, when she was in her cell and wanted to write more poetry, she was told by the jailer that she was not allowed a pen. What she did is she took the zip from her jumper and used the cell wall to write out new poetry with the tool from her zip. Now, it is clear the space for us to express real meaningful solidarity with people like the Palestinians, not only the Palestinians, but like the Palestinians. And you can see it as clear as someone like John Mann, who now, having worked very hard to bring down Jeremy Corbyn, is an advisor to the British government on anti-Semitism. He's made absolutely clear that his next space to focus on is the internet in terms of narrowing people's expression. Throughout this period, when our expression has been narrowed, there has been resistance. Find those pieces of resistance, support Danny's song, Letter to Corbyn, and support people who are standing in the face of this, because they will be vindicated by history, those who have been treated so terribly during this process.
That's fantastic, Loki. Thanks very much. I'm not entirely sure of how we format it within the Zoom call, but we have a panel now. And so I'll introduce the panel, and then we've got the best part of half an hour or so for people to ask questions and the panel to make contributions. So we have Pamela Fitzpatrick, who's a former parliamentary candidate for the Labour Party in Harrow East. She's also a Labour councillor and an activist. We have Naomi Wimborne Idrissi, who's a founding member of Jewish Voices for Labour and a Labour activist. We have Loki, who we've just been speaking with. We also have Howard Beckett, who's the Assistant General Secretary of Unite the Union with remit for politics and law. He's an NEC member, I guess, and also a lawyer who will shed some light on how they're going to support Corbyn and other people. And we have Justin Schlossberg, who's a media lecturer and activist. So if we can get the questions, I'm not sure how we're going to feed the questions in now. yet see the question. Until we get the questions coming in, if I can, what I'll do is I'll ask each of the panelists if you'd like to speak for a minute or two, just giving your initial thoughts on the issues that we've looked at so far. So if I start with Pamela, if that's okay, and then we'll go through everyone else. So Pamela, if you'd like to start.
Thank you, Paul. Yes, thanks to all the speakers. It's been really interesting to hear them. We thought this was a really important meeting to hold around freedom of speech, because most of us will have had worries about what's going on, not just about freedom of speech and its erosion, but also the erosion of any due process. So we have a commitment from the Labour Party to the Human Rights Act, but much of that is being abused at the moment, and people are left really worried about what they can say. So even getting people to talk to motions in CLPs, people are really worried that if they say anything, they will be suspended. So we've got to do something about it. So glad to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pamela. Naomi, if you'd like to go next.
Yeah, like Pamela, delighted to be here, and all strength to Red Labour for setting this up. Brilliant idea. I want to pick up on something Paul said about lawfare and the power of this use of litigation. Jane also referred to it. This is a frightening development, and much as we as Labour Party activists are aware of the need to fight our corner in the party, and we must do that, and we cannot have people around Jeremy and others ostensibly on the left backpedaling and saying, oh, let's wait until next year's conference, please, comrades. 100,000 of us will probably been thrown out by then. But the lawfare aspect and the broad no platforming, cancelling, just negation of a whole range of views, particularly anti-racist views. Look at the backlash against Black Lives Matter. All these kind of, the idea that it should not be legal to teach anti-capitalism in schools, or raise the discussion about the nature of capitalism, the nature of colonialism. This is a global threat. And I think we've got to start looking for allies who have been quiet up until now, because it's only been pro-Palestinian activists. This is not the case anymore. It won't just be the wrong kind of Jew. It'll be the wrong kind of every human being if we're not careful. We just will be completely silenced. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Naomi. I mean, that brings to mind, obviously, the poignant and famous lines of Pasta Niemöller about turning a blind eye when they went for one group that was disfavored, and until they finally came for us in the end. Howard, if you'd like to go next.
Thanks, Paul. Yes, I'm going to touch on a theme that's been touched on by Luki and Andrew before, and that is, what is the real purpose of the suspension of Jeremy Corbyn? And it is ultimately to see the end of socialism within the Labour Party, and we must recognise that. In order to recognise that, Paul, we must dismantle any logic behind the suspension of Jeremy Corbyn. There is absolutely no breach of any rule of the Labour Party, and that is what the NEC panel found. And they found it for very good reasons, and that is because the AHRC report, of course, identified when freedom of speech does not protect unlawful commentary, but went on specifically to say that freedom of speech would protect anyone who wanted to talk about the scale of anti-Semitism that they had experienced within the Labour Party. And the important reason as to why for Jeremy Corbyn, simple, threefold. You cannot tackle racism without knowing the scale of it. The man who had been labelled an anti-Semite and a racist, having fought racism all his life, was entitled to protect his own reputation. And of course, the British public, as Loki said, must understand that there are not 200,000 anti-Semites within the Labour Party. The Labour Party was not described, as Lucy Powell describes it, as institutionally racist, and all of us should object to that. All of us who have fought racism all our lives should object to a front bench MP misdescribing the conclusions of the HRC report. Once we understand how illogical it is to charge Jeremy Corbyn, once we understand that the NEC processes were upheld by a recommendation from GLUE and had an independent counsel present whenever they decided that Jeremy Corbyn had not broken any rule, then we can all move on to identifying the Lord Adonises of this world who tell us all to get out of Labour and really say what we want, because what he wants is another establishment party that does not reflect socialism in society. And all of us, Paul, all of us from the background that you and I share will know that we have to fight for a socialist party in mainstream politics.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Howard. Is Justin here? Is Justin?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm here.
Oh, hi, Justin. Would you like to just say a few, just introductory remarks, and then we'll take in some questions?
Yeah, just very quickly. I mean, I think pretty much my fellow panelists have already said it, but I think it's what we're facing is a full spectrum assault on free speech that is being it's a war that's being waged not just in the Labour Party, although that's obviously an important dimension of it. It's being waged in the courts. It's a political war. It's a legal war, and I think it requires a kind of full spectrum defense and a full spectrum resistance. And I think, that if there is one issue, and I know you mentioned, Paul, that there has been splits within the left, but if there's one issue that can unite everyone, it is this one. And I think we should all think strategically about how we can resist this at every level, whether that's calling in to radio phone-ins, whether that's writing letters, whether that's lobbying MPs, whether that's supporting libel defences, as well as all of the activism within the party.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Justin, and thanks everybody for those contributions. So we have a range of questions, and what I propose is I'll ask a question, and it might not be possible for everybody on the panel to reply to each question. So if the first person or two that wants to reply, and then we'll try and get through as many of the questions as we can. The first question I've got in front is that do the panel think that Keir Starmer has created, and it's probably, you'll rarely hear me say this, in fairness to Starmer, it's not just him, but has the Labour Party more broadly created a hierarchy of racism within Labour by ignoring the recent report from the Labour Muslim Network on Islamophobia? So people think that there's the danger that this whole episode has created a sort of dangerous hierarchy of racism. Naomi, please.
It most definitely has created a hierarchy of racism, but not simply by its attitude to that particular report from the Muslim Council of Britain, but in its whole attitude to dealing with the anti-Semitism question and dealing with its relationship with people from other minorities. Afrophobia is not tackled in the Labour Party. Islamophobia is sort of recognised but not dealt with. We could go on listing those equality strands who have been completely sidelined and neglected. And of course, it's particularly revealed in the leaked documents that had black self-organised groups up in arms, and they have not had their concerns dealt with at all. So I think the hierarchy of racism is a real thing, and it's, to be honest, it's very frightening to Jewish people who know where anti-Semitism is real. On the far right in society, it's a threat to us all. And this kind of hierarchy makes it harder, almost impossible really, to build a unified anti-racist struggle, which is absolutely vital. So not only is it not helping Jews, it's positively disadvantaging everybody who wants to fight racism for more equality and justice in society.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I think you're absolutely right now with everything you said there. Would anybody else like to respond to this question, this idea of a hierarchy of racism? No worries if you don't. We've got Howard.
Paul, I would just want to comment in respect to this, not in regards to the hierarchy, but just to reflect on the lamentable response from Labour in respect to Black Lives Matters. We have, high-profile frontbench Labour MPs who've been involved in respect of statues being put up for slave trade dealers. We have a leader who talked about a moment, and then we simply have not got fulsomely behind Black Lives Matter, and it's vitally important that Labour does so. And in that sense, yes, we have let down a whole segment of society.
Brilliant. Thank you, Howard. And I think, again, I'm sure everybody followed the news and developments in recent weeks and months with the institutionalization of Islamophobia in France and also right across Europe, and not to mention the long-standing issues we've had here with Prevent and how that legitimates Islamophobia and the targeting of specific communities. So I think that is a really important issue for all of us. The next question then is to comrades of Jewish heritage or backgrounds, how does it feel to have your own heritage and beliefs negated because of your political views, especially by non-Jewish persons? I think this goes back to a point that Naomi and others have made about being the wrong sort of Jew for those people who are cynically weaponizing anti-Semitism. So if anybody would like to respond to that question. Justin?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the great ironies and tragedies of this whole farcical episode that Jewish people of a particular political persuasion have been victims of anti-Semitism by the very people who claim to be calling it out generally in the Labour Party or accusing Jeremy of being anti-Semitic. There's countless examples. I won't go into it now. I know Naomi can testify to that on a personal level, as can I. But it is absolutely outrageous. When you have someone like Tom Bauer on primetime Good Morning Television, sitting next to a Jewish person, Michael Sigelov, and calling him a self-hating Jew, and not even having any eyebrow raised by the presenters, then I think that gives you an indication of just how normalized certain forms of anti-Jewish hate speech have become in this whole story episode.
Thank you very much, Justin. Would anybody else like to come in on this? We've got a lot of other questions, so don't worry if we can move on. Here's a question which this overlaps. There's a few questions that feed off the back of this one. A couple of people have asked this in the live chat, and it is simply, is it time to leave Labour? So I'm not a Labour member, so I'll put that out to those of you who are fighting the good fight in the very inauspicious circumstances. So we would like to respond to that. Pamela, you haven't spoken yet. I don't know if you want to speak on this one, and then anyone else.
No, it's not the time to leave Labour. And I know a lot of people are fed up and they say to me, why do we stay? Where are we going? And I do think that's a problem with the question of leadership. People need to have a reason to stay, and what are we going to do? So in part, that's what this was about today, that we need some kind of direction about what we're going to do to challenge all of these things that are going on that are making people feel so uncomfortable and so unhappy. Because if you have no power, what do you do? And the thing is, we do have power. We have massive power because we have the membership, and people don't realise that. Because when you keep bashing people, when you keep accusing them of things, people feel powerless. But why are the powers that be attacking the members? Because that's the only thing stopping them. We need to keep the members. It is depressing, honestly. All I can say is it's pretty much always been like this in the Labour Party, but we've got to work at it to achieve socialism for the future, because there's no other vehicle that's going to achieve that. There's been other parties that have been set up. They haven't worked. So we're here, we've got the membership. In a way, it's never been a better time for Labour and for socialism. If you think about what's happening in other countries, if you think about the parties that have moved towards the right, to neoliberalism, they failed. You know, if you think about Podemos, when it changed its position, look at Sweden, in the countries there, what's going on. So please stay. I know it's kind of easy for us to say, but we need you, and we need to mobilise and organise and take back power for our party. We almost were there. And I can't remember a time when we've had so many members in the party and had so many people who are socialists. So the time is ours, and society needs it. Please, please, don't leave. That's not the thing to do.
Thank you very much, Pamela. Would anybody else like to speak on this? Howard?
Yeah, Paul, I should firstly reference Thelma Walker, who I shared a platform with this morning, who made a very eloquent case as for why she felt the need to leave the Labour Party. And I can empathise with people, obviously, who feel in these circumstances. What's happening to Jeremy Corbyn, as we said before, cannot be seen in isolation. It can't be seen in isolation from the fact that we have very few socialist voices, if any, in the shadow cabinet, very few trade unionist voices in the shadow cabinet. It can't be seen in isolation from the response to Black Lives decision not to oppose the covert human surveillance bill, an extraordinary decision that reflects where Labour has moved to vis-a-vis the establishment. And obviously we know already the Bakers Union have put out commentary to the effect that they will be going to their membership over affiliation. And I can imagine those debates going on. I can imagine the two sides of the debates. The one side that says that members' money should not go to a party that is establishment light and is looking to water down socialism to the extent that it cannot change workers' lives. And then on the other side, I can see the argument where people will say, as Pamela has said, that this is a unique relationship between the trade union movement and a political party, and we have to fight for our ideals of socialism. I, Paul, very much am in the latter camp of fighting for our ideals of socialism at this point in time. The reason why Red Labour is so brave tonight in putting on this event is to say very clearly that our voices will not be silenced, no matter how much of the apparatchik you control, no matter what tactics of bullying and intimidation you introduce, no matter how you try to stop our freedom of speech, we will not be silenced. And right here and now, for me, we need to fight, and we need to fight as we've never fought before, because there are future generations who depend on Labour staying a socialist party.
Thanks very much, Howard. Again, this is a debate for Labour members and a debate that will rage on, and I'm sure it'll be raised in different ways. There's a related point that I'll probably come back to you initially, Howard, but anyone can jump in on this, on a question that was asked. I've taught British public law for a little over 10 years now. So when Corbyn was suspended, I assumed it was on the basis of some vague notion of bringing the party into disrepute, which wouldn't stand up for a second in any sort of serious judicial scrutiny. But the actual withholding of the whip, now I understand there's far more discretion afforded to the leader of the PLP in that regard. So the question we have, which again, as I said, Howard, you might want to take a first stab at, but anybody else can join in, is can we have some information about which legal sections or what legal rules can be used to challenge this decision around Corbyn, but also to challenge David Evans, for example, telling members not to discuss the Corbyn case and so forth. So I don't know if you want to address that one, Howard, or again, anybody else in the panel.
Yeah, I'll address both aspects of that, Paul, if it's okay. The first aspect in regard to the suspension of Jeremy himself, and obviously I'm on record as having saying that I'm assisting Jeremy in respect of his legal case, so I'm talking with that hat on rather than any NEC hat. But the suspension of Jeremy Corbyn himself was simply wrong. It's, as I referenced in my first initial comments, the HRC report specifically talks about the freedom of speech not allowing for unlawful language, but then goes on page 27 to specifically say that anyone who wants to talk about the scale of anti-Semitism within the party will be protected by Article 10. So it was simply wrong. The important thing that people need to know whenever it went to the NEC panel, and it is vital that people understand this was not, as Annalise Dodds referred to it, as a politicised panel. That is just ridiculous and unhelpful commentary that is designed to undermine the democracy of the Labour Party, undermine the rule book, undermine the NEC's authority, and of course to undermine the individuals who sat in that panel. That panel of 5 was reflective of the balance that exists within the NEC at this moment in time regarding the right and the left. That panel of 5 had a report and recommendations from GLUE before they sat. That panel of 5 was assisted on the day with independent counsel, and that panel of 5 found that there was no breach of rule and Jeremy's membership should be reinstated. Now, of course, Paul, his whip had only ever been withdrawn because his membership had been suspended. There had been no separate decision that had been taken in regard to the whip. Once his membership was reinstated, immediately, de facto, his whip should be reinstated. And for Keir Starmer not to allow that whip to be reinstated when no action separately had been taken regarding the whip is double jeopardy. It obviously flies in the face of natural justice. It is exactly the type of political interference the HRC said would be unlawful, discriminatory, and it runs a horse and cart through our rule book and the presumption of the NEC democracy of the Labour Party. Now, subsequent to that, Nick Brown has obviously written a letter in respect to the suspension of the whip with a catch-all in regard to bringing the party into disrepute, a 3-month, and it was reported in the papers today that it's intended for that to be a rolling 3 months unless Jeremy apologises for his role in anti-Semitism, whatever that vague phrase is supposed to mean. Well, we all know what it is supposed to mean. But the reality for Labour is, on a challenge, on a legal challenge, they will have to support whether or not that was an independent decision that was taken or whether or not it was, in fact, a temper tantrum arising from the fact that there was an NEC outcome that did not suit the leadership. And Paul, I'll finish with this. I'll finish with saying that if I say that there is not just not good faith, but there is bad faith on the part of Keir Starmer, and there is disingenuousness on the part of Keir Starmer, people can reach their own conclusions as to why I would say that.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Howard. Naomi, I think you wanted to come in on this as well?
Yes, yes, please. Thank you very much, Howard, for that very clear explanation about what's been going on. And the question of interference, the fact that Starmer is clearly engaged in the sort of interference that the EHRC blamed Labour under Corbyn's leadership for being unlawful over. I mean, just ridiculous. But I want to say it's great to see one or two people in the chat saying, because they can see the fight that those of us on this call are prepared to put up, they may be willing to come back into the party. Please, please, please do. We may not have long. I mean, I really feel it's do or die. We either get together and put up some fight now, or we can really.
The tribunal act unlawfully, you go to the next level if there's an error of law. What Howard was describing of the hearing with Jeremy Corbyn, where the party's own head of governance and legal is a lawyer and advises there's no case. They have external counsel, barristers, saying there is no case. And yet, Keir takes it upon himself to decide he's not accepting that. If that was something happening in a benefits tribunal or even employment tribunal, you would be up to the next level in the court saying they've acted unlawfully. It's irrational to not follow your own legal advice. So what we have going on is so serious, I can't stress enough really. It's unprecedented, I think, in the Labour Party. In all the time I've been in the party, all the times, all the misery of various things that have happened, this is unprecedented. The attack on due process, the attack on freedom of speech. So we really have to fight at this time like no other time.
That's excellent, Pamela. Thank you very much. Would anybody else like to comment on this one? We can move on. We've call, just to let everybody else on the call know that once we finish with the panel, which we'll do at about 8:30, we're then going to open it up to anybody who wants to make a comment. So if you can indicate in the chat box that you'd like to speak, and I'll try and get a list of names, bearing in mind that it's going fairly quickly, so I might not catch everyone, but if you can just sort of raise your hand, as it were, virtually, or indicate you'd like to speak. We've got a comment in from somebody, a comrade in America, so I'll read that in a moment, but I'll ask one final question to the panel and then give everybody a chance to sum up around it. So as I said, I'm not in Labour, one for me, but if people do stay and fight in Labour, and if Corbyn does have the whip restored, but it's restored around the basis of this idea of rallying around the EHRC report and moving on and building forward, well, that also incorporates the IHRA definition of what anti-Semitism is, with its 11 examples. And this is fundamentally problematic, not just for people in the Labour Party, but as I've said, we've seen councils that have refused to allow pro-Palestinian demonstrations take place on their property. We've seen universities and student unions been threatened with anti-Semitism for supporting BDS. We've seen the Trump government in the US passing an executive order conflating criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism to undermine BDS. So what sort of a victory will it be if Corbyn is restored and if a section of the left and the Labour Party manages to hold on in the trenches there, but we're rallying around this definition of what anti-Semitism is and what can be done about that? So that's my own question. I'm just putting it out there for anybody on the panel.
I think a pretty hollow one, and I think that's kind of the implication of your question in some ways. But it's important to remember that what this is about is not just an assault on free speech. And whilst, like, you know, I hugely admire the work that people like Howard and many others are doing, you know, through the legal avenues. I'm involved myself with the potential challenge to the EHRC through the organisation Truth Defence. This is also about a massive institutional cover-up. This is about an assault on truth, and we mustn't lose sight of that. There was a dominant narrative that pervaded the media and virtually the Labour Party had become engulfed with anti-Semitism, and that Jeremy Corbyn was complicit in that. And we have reams of evidence at our disposal, not just as a result of the leaked report, but that's obviously a big part of it, which demonstrably shows that that was a false narrative. That was a false narrative propagated by ideologues who were opposed to the idea of Labour being a socialist party and of Britain potentially having a socialist government. And until we get that truth out, until we uncover that cover-up to an audience that stretches well beyond the people on this call and our base, then I'm afraid the struggle is going to go on, whether or not
I'm going to have a. This is a fight for socialism. There's obviously all sorts of strands that are going on in respect of international socialism, all types of, Loki referenced the fact that it's not simply Palestinian people that we are struggling for around the world, where there are entire countries where we have similar to the Palestinian struggle. And obviously we understand from our background the importance of a constant fight against imperialism and the establishment. But I'm going to say that it is important to win the fight that is in front of you. I refuse to be downhearted in respect of what is happening at the moment. We have shone a light in respect of where the Labour Party has moved to in a very short period of time. We see with the covert human surveillance bill and the abstention how terrible that is. We've seen with the Black Lives Matter how lamentable the response is. We have shone a light on what could well have been a war of attrition against the left that went unseen for years before we realised that socialism and Corbynism had exited the Labour Party. Shining that light allows the left to come together and to fight for what we have right here and now. And whenever we fight for socialism, it is important to win the fights that are right in front of us. And right here now, we must have Jeremy Corbyn's whip returned. And then the body that is coming together of left groups, left activist groups that realise what we are fighting for and what is at stake must never give up that narrative again going forward, and have to be unified and have to be that voice within the Labour Party. The left unions have to come together with the left CLPs and the left activist groups such as Red Labour, and we have to be coordinated in respect of the fight. This is one part of it, and a part of it that for me we have to win.
That's a great point, Howard, and well made. Would anybody else like to speak to this question? We can move on and give everybody else a chance to speak. As I said, I think Howard's made an eloquent case there for the importance of this, even with all the limitations around it. So we're going to now open up for a few minutes for anybody who's on the call to make a comment, make a statement. I'd ask you to keep it brief and to the point. There's a long-running joke amongst people in my line of work, and I'm sure everybody else has experienced it. When you go to a conference and someone says, I have a question, but it's more of a comment, and it goes on for 15 minutes. So we want to avoid that. If you can make a brief intervention, we'll try and get as many Low-key a chance to speak a bit more at the end, and Howard, sorry, as well. So the first person I have listed is Paul Simpson. Paul, are you on the call?
I am, yeah.
Would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, everyone, for organising this meeting. I was just wondering, I mean, this is directed at the panel and particularly the members of the panel who are active in the Labour Party. And I was just wondering what they think the best thing we can do as just ordinary Labour Party activists to secure Jeremy's reinstatement. I mean, is it the kind of model motions that are circulating at the moment? What are your thoughts on that? Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Paul. Before the panel replies, I'll just let one or two other people come in, and then we'll come back and give everybody else a chance at the end. Do we have Mia Mantri on the call?
Yes, I'm just wondering what our powers are for the possibility of leadership challenge, and what could come about that, because I think that it's not like it's like we have good reason because Starmer's gone back on his promises to unite the party and and not to ditch the Corbyn's manifesto.
That's a great question, Mia. Thank you. Again, I'll just let two more people speak and then I'll go back to the panel if that's okay. Richie McLaughlin, do you want to speak?
Yes, please. Thanks very much, Paul. The one thing is, I just want to make a play. And by the way, cheers, Howard. You couldn't have made a better play for someone staying in the Labour Party. But the bit is what we need. What a question I have ready for the panel is, where are we going to go from just having these meetings? What's the best way moving forward?
A great question, Richie. Thanks very much. I'll take one final one from Musa Askari.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a comment. It may lead to a question very shortly. It's more about symbolism, really. So the statement about numbers and how numbers can be amplified up or down depending on the language one uses. So it's a question about language and how maybe the support for Jeremy may have been lacking, or I haven't heard about it publicly as much because of the language and how numbers have been used symbolically. So we often say, and it's true, that one case of injustice is too many. You may call it anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, ableism, whatever. So fair enough, but that is a symbolic statement. So when you have 0.3% of the membership or whatever the number happens to be, percentage-wise, you may look low, but it's more than one. And if one is too many, 0.3 symbolically is way too many. Now, that seems to have been used, the opponents of Jeremy and the opponents of Agenda, to say, look, symbolically, the injustice is immense. What are you doing about it? And I think more could have been done to support Jeremy, to defend against that flank, as it were, of symbolic language, of how it's been used to amplify, and rightly so, because of the injustices and what that means of anti-Semitism. But we need to up our language game. And I wonder if the panel agrees to go beyond sociology, to go beyond numbers, and to raise it, in my world, a spiritual language and a symbolic language.
Thank you very much, Musa. If I give the panel a few minutes to reply, and then we've got a few more people who want to make contributions, I'll come around to them. So if members of the panel want to reply to the specific questions that were asked, or the points raised.
I'd like to, Paul.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, I can't see it at the minute.
Oh, sorry, I didn't use my. I should use my blue hands.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, no, so many of these questions address, you know, what are we as members going to do? And I mean, I think this discussion is the sort of thing we need to continue having in order to work out what to do. I mean, people are talking about motions of no confidence in Starmer. They're talking about if people have motions ruled out of order in their CLPs and branches, to get together as groups of members and write letters. Just keep bombarding the NEC. Let's use the fact that we had 14 members of the NEC, including Howard. Thank you so much for that, Howard. Putting up a really robust defense of Jeremy and his position, and basically the position of the left. Use that, have motions in solidarity with that. It's obviously we want Jeremy to have the whip restored, but we've got a much broader battle. So whatever we do, it's got to be devoted to bringing the members together and making them feel energized and mobilized. If I may, Paul, I'd like to talk about that last question from Musa, because I think it's very important. It's the sort of thing that Jewish Voice for Labour is really trying to address. The numbers game. It's really a difficult one for us to win on, and Musa's absolutely right. If you accept the idea that there's got to be zero tolerance of anti-Semitism or any other form of bigotry, you lock yourself into this thing where if there's one person anywhere in the Labour Party who is susceptible to saying something inappropriate that offends Jewish people, then we failed. Now, this is really difficult. I recommend everybody to read, maybe somebody can pop it in the chat, a link. We did a detailed look at what the HRC report says about what they call training and education, the idea that Jewish members were being discriminated against because of lack of training about anti-Semitism. How do you train people about anti-Semitism? You train dogs to jump through hoops through repetitive exercise. What we need is education. We need people to understand what anti-Semitism is, where it comes from, what is appropriate language to use when talking about Zionism or Israel or the Palestinian struggle, and what is not and why it's not. And that requires free and open debate. And we're doing the exact opposite. So I think certainly, Musa, let's make a much more sophisticated use of language in this whole area. Let's not get trapped. So yeah, I'm gonna, if I can find it, I'm gonna put, yeah, there we are, I think it's there already.
They're excellent points, Naomi. Thank you very much. And that last point you made is really important. It brings to mind Ambalvanar Sivanandan and the arguments he made in the 80s about the new industries of unconscious bias training and so forth, and how this sought to depoliticize the fight against racism and anti-Semitism and make it this sort of professionalized discourse, which is a dead end for us as socialists. I don't know if any more of the panel would like to come back on the questions that were asked.
Yeah, just briefly, if I may, on just that last point. For me, it's kind of simple insofar as I think that the line actually that Jeremy took in his statement, in his original statement, in response to the EHRC, was exactly right, and that acknowledges that there have been instances of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, and that is a problem that we should all acknowledge and confront. Regardless of whether it is a bigger problem in the Tory party, which I'm pretty sure that it is, and indeed most other similar scaled organisations and institutions in the country. But nevertheless, we are an anti-racist movement. One is too many, and it should be acknowledged and confronted. But equally, we should confront and acknowledge that this issue has been exploited as a political football. It has done real damage to the fight against real anti-Semitism, and is being used to wage ideological warfare and delegitimize a progressive movement. And the last thing that I will say, which we haven't mentioned, it hasn't really come up tonight, and it's kind of central to all this, but there is a particular front in this battle that is happening through libel and through slap actions. I saw Jane Haybrook posted a comment earlier in relation to this. This is something that we should all be particularly concerned about, because it targets individuals, deliberately targets individuals, I think, individuals who have everything to lose. And if one individual is forced into settling in such a case, it sets an awful precedent for our entire movement. So I do think that is something we have an event, Truth Defence has an event on Thursday night, another panel discussion on this particular issue, and I'd encourage comrades to join that.
Brilliant. Thanks, Justin. And Howard, do you want to come in and then Pamela? Sorry, Pamela, and then Howard. Sorry,
Thanks.
got the running
That's
order.
okay. Yeah, just to say, it's not just about staying in the Labour Party, it's about doing stuff in the Labour Party. And the very basic is turning up to meetings and voting, because often you can outvote these terrible things that are going on. You can get through motions if you turn up. But a lot of people don't want to go to meetings because they're so horrible, a lot of the CLP meetings. But also, we were let down by trade unions, I'm afraid, with open selection. If we'd had open selection of MPs, we might not be in the situation that we're in. And we have to go back to that. We have to fight for democracy, open selection, and hold these politicians to account. How many of you have right-wing Labour MPs who every time there's an election, they send out text messages and what else to people to vote for their preferred candidate? And those preferred candidates often don't actually do anything in the CLP or the branch. It's just about blocking somebody who doesn't have the same politics. How often are there issues that you raise where there is anti-Semitism that people are concerned about and nothing is done because it's not in respect of a left-wing person? So we have to challenge, and it's so frightening for people. You know, this morning I was attacked by the CAA on social media, and it is quite horrible when that happens to you. We've got to stand together. The whole point about being sued, absolutely. Nobody, I am told so often that you should sue somebody for defamation. Nobody can afford to sue somebody. Nobody, unless you are David Beckham or somebody like that, you cannot afford it. So we need some way to stop this happening. I don't know whether that's by any legislation that can be introduced to stop these kind of vexatious claims against people where they are baseless. So the first thing, turn up to meetings, agree that we need open selection, and let's fight for it at conference. The General Secretary's position shouldn't be confirmed until conference have accepted it, and that's something we need to vote on and press for. Please, please, we need all to come together and not have egos, but think about the wider issues, that we need socialism and we need democracy. That it starts with turning up at the meetings, staying in the party and turning up at the meetings, and get involved in your unions to make sure that the union leadership is genuinely left-wing, genuinely democratic within the union, and that they are going to do things like assist with open selection in the future.
Brilliant. Thanks, Pamela. Howard, did you want to come in on this?
Yeah, and definitely I'd like to echo Pamela's contribution in respect of join your trade union and get involved. And the trade unions are obviously a bedrock in the Labour Party, and get involved. Pamela, I'd slightly take issue insofar as I think the open selection was much more how Paul referenced before in respect of the leadership running and continuing to be chased by the right wing. Unfortunately, the leadership made it clear that they wanted this position in respect of the open democracy review, and the unions, certainly the left unions who had always said that they would back Jeremy, went along with backing Jeremy. And now I think we're all in a place where we can see the importance of democracy within the Labour Party and how we must at every outlet challenge for more member-led democracy within the Labour Party. And we cannot have MPs who think that they have a job for life and think that they are not accountable to the membership in any way. That just simply has to change. Paul, I'll reference what I was going to reference later very quickly in respect of Paul's question about what can we do in regard to model motions, etc. And I've committed previously to make sure that Unite put up information on a website for people to get access to in respect of freedom of speech, in regard to model motions that you can put forward, in regard to template subject access requests if you feel that your CLP is being particularly targeted, and what your legal rights are in order to make sure that you can step back, because Labour are clearly, the apparatchik is clearly using a part of the HRC report that talks about all officers being agents of the Labour Party to quell freedom of speech. It was part of the HRC report that Karen Moynihan was pushing back on in respect of the finding, and somewhere down the line that push did not become as fervent as it should be. And now the fact that officers of CLPs or agents are being used to quell freedom of speech, and it's something that I've committed Unite to make sure that we will certainly give people access to what they need in order to push back in respect of it. Richie, your comment in regard to where you're going to go to here, and the commentary from Mia in respect of a leadership challenge. We need 40 MPs to challenge the leadership, and it's not likely to happen at the moment. There are 32 within the Socialist Campaign Group, including people in the House of Lords, and that's reflective of what Pamela is saying about the need for a different method of selecting MPs, so as we have people that actually represent our class issues in Parliament, and this never happens again. But what we do have is, in a very short period of time ago, we had a Labour leader who was elected twice overwhelmingly by the membership to pursue clear socialist policies on behalf of that membership. That's what we have, a voice. So Richie, whenever you say what's going to happen, where do we go to? Is it just motions? No, it's not. It is the left coming together and showing the strength of our voice, because at some stage down the path, and who knows how long the current leadership will be, the leadership of Labour, there will be another opportunity for the membership to show its teeth and to say that the membership shall be heard at the top of the party, and then the issues that Pamela is addressing about open selection will follow by nature in respect of it. So this is about the left getting together. We made mistakes previously in our history in the Labour movement, and one of the mistakes obviously was in the Blair years, where the left voice just disappeared. That cannot happen again. We have to bring our groups together, we have to show that we're unified, and we have to be ready for the fight as and when it comes to take back control of the party.
Thanks very much, Howard. I'm going to very quickly, there are a couple of people that want to make points from the floor, and I'm sorry we're a bit tight for time, so if I could ask them to be very brief, or as brief as you can be. So first, Ruth van Straten. Don't know if you're still on the call, Ruth. Ruth Van Straten.
Hello, hi. Sorry, I didn't know how to turn my microphone off. I just want to know, I'm Jewish. I spent all my time online. I've now left Labour. I just want to know how left-wing Jews get heard. Like, even if you go on centrist Jewish pages, you get crucified. How do we get heard? I just don't understand what to do.
Thank you very much, Ruth. And I'm sorry, it was my bad time management. We'll have to have these interventions quick at the end.
No problem.
We also had Deepa Driver.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, just very quickly, I'm chair of Camden Momentum, and our branch has passed quite a strong motion in support of Jeremy, criticising Keir Starmer. It's quite important because Keir's the local MP for one of the constituencies that falls within Camden Momentum. We're also the Momentum branch, which has Highgate branch within it, which has also passed a motion in support of Jeremy. I wanted to say that what we would like to see, many of us, is a more aggressive response to the misbehaviour by Keir and his cronies within the party establishment. I think we are tired of seeing this defensive approach, particularly in relation to Keir's shameful behaviour on the CHIS bill and also on Jeremy. I'd like to say that Caroline makes the point that Keir is essentially a tool of the establishment because he's a member of the Trilateral Commission. And I think we need to do more on the left to highlight the absolute, the absolute Tory light behaviour of the current Labour leadership. And lastly, just a quick point on the back of something that was said earlier, just to let, I know many are concerned about universities adopting the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, and I wanted to let you know that the trade union UCU, which is not affiliated to Labour, but is the one of the larger trade unions within the academic community, or rather is the trade union for the academic community, as well as the professional and administrative staff, has a policy position against the IHRA definition quite explicitly. So it might be useful to communicate that to JVL members and those who are concerned about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deepa. And then just if we can get a final comment or question from Devinder Williams.
Hi, yeah, I just try and be as quick as possible. I just wanted to get people's thoughts on whether the whole episode with anti-Semitism illustrates that there is, on many parts of the left, an incorrect approach with regards to free speech and racism, and as to whether, typically it's seen as valid to try and tackle racism by essentially ostracizing people or kicking them out or something. And I think the whole episode shows that approach is very liable to be open to abuse, especially when what you're dealing with aren't even kind of racial slurs, they're just statements about the world which are said to play into stereotypes and so forth. And so should we be focusing much more on having a principled stance on free speech and to be tackling racism by actually, engaging with people?
Thank you very much, Devinder. That's excellent. Unfortunately, just because of how we are on time and I've got a specific slot allocated for Howard, I don't know if we can let all of the panelists come back in on those points, but I think they were really important points that will inform the discussion for Labour Party members going forward. If I can just say, I think that last point Devinder made is a really interesting and important one about the sort of limitations and dangers of online call-out culture. It goes back to what Naomi said and relates to some of what Loki said as well, that if we're talking seriously about anti-racism, it has to be anti-racism as class politics, anti-racism as anti-imperialism, and it can't be this sort of weaponized liberal identity. Go back to Devinder's point. One final point, I just want to thank the panelists, and I want to thank again Red Labour. I will say I'm not a Labour member. I have disagreements with some of the arguments about staying and leaving and so forth, but I will say that if I was a Labour Party member, I'd take great heart from this event and from the people that have spoken at this event. Certainly a lot more heart than I would take from the apparently socialist campaign group in the Parliamentary Labour Party and other sort of more prominent aspects of the Labour Party left. So I think that you are a credit, those members of the panelists who are in Labour, a credit to the best aspects of the Labour tradition. So thanks very much for your time. We'll end the panel section again just to thank everybody, and I want to give Howard now a few minutes just to say a bit about what Unite will offer, Howard, in terms of legal support for people who are either challenging, the comrades in Bristol who are suspended and so forth, in cases like that.
Yeah, Paul, I'm going to slightly indulge myself if it's okay. I think I referenced in one of the questions from Paul the things that we are putting together in respect of providing online assistance, and obviously everybody knows where I am in respect of these things, and I hope everybody knows the level of assistance that Unite has provided always to Jeremy and always to those who have needed it on the left of the party. And for those of you who are in CLPs who are being attacked, if you do contact Unite's local political officer and they will contact me, you will receive the support, but you will also get the online facilities that will be put in place so as people feel the confidence of having their voice heard. I just wanted, Paul, to reference that last point that Devinda made, and then one other point that was in the chat, if I may. You've referenced the importance of racism and class issues, and it has to be seen as a class struggle, a division of race causing divisions of class, and how important it is that we see it in that context so as we can really promote socialism amongst our class. But I would just remind everybody, and I think this is where Devinda was pushing to, is that it is education that is at the core of a response to racism. I'm fortunate enough to be the Unions Connect to Show Racism the Red Card, which is a wonderful charity that is not about racism within football, but about using football as a medium to get to young people to change attitudes in respect of racism. And it is the Mandela quote that no one is born a racist, and if they are not born a racist, then they are taught to be a racist, and then I can teach them not to be a racist. And that is where the discussion around racism needs to go to. This idea that if a child is in school and portrays racist attitudes, that they are expelled is wrong, in the same fashion that how we are at the moment tackling racism within our political parties is wrong also. We must have the debate and be prepared to teach people that racism is wrong. And finally, Paul, someone put in the chat, should we not be fighting the Tories? And I just wanted to make this point that of course we should be fighting the Tories, but the blame for where we are right now lies firmly at the feet of Keir Starmer. One of the worst traits of this leadership over the last week or so has been that thousands of people have died of COVID. Our people have died of COVID. 5.5 million public sector workers have been told that they are going to pay for this crisis with austerity. There are thousands of people losing their job. Unite last week had to take the government to court to protect the right to picket during the COVID crisis. And we have strikes that are commencing all over the country because of fire and rehire and the imposition of layoff clauses. And the reality for all of us now is that it is a binary choice out there as to whether or not the argument is that the working class pay for this crisis or does wealth pay for this crisis. And we need a leadership of an established socialist party to be calling for wealth to pay this crisis. And Keir Starmer's behaviour over last week and beyond in respect of going toward to trounce the reputation of the previous leader in order to smother himself in a flag and portray himself as new leadership is an abdication of our class. And that is the reason why at this moment in time, it says more about his character and much less about Jeremy Corbyn's.
Excellent points, Howard. Thank you very much for making them. I want, in terms of the panelists, and again, as I said, I can't reiterate this enough, I'm not in Labour, but I think the panelists here have given the best possible account of what hope there is within Labour to stay and fight, and that certainly would sort of embolden me and if I was a member. Loki, can I ask you just to say maybe a final word about the broader questions of supporting Palestinian rights and sort of this whole broader issue? I'll say some final words and we'll finish off with a performance as well.
Well, thank you for the question, Paul. I would say it's important to be aware that when thinking about history, words like Zionism are very, very close to being put in a place where they can no longer even be brought up in conversations, and it's definitely an aim of some specific actors in the equation. So please do be aware of that. There's a lot to be discussed in terms of Keir Starmer and the Labour leadership. And it's been great to hear some of those perspectives today, but it's a much longer conversation, obviously. I'm looking forward to seeing Danny's performance. It's a great tune. Please support his song and get it now.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Loki. I'll sort of take chair's privilege and say some final words. So Loki has mentioned already and mentioned earlier the question of history and so forth and where we are now. And I think this is crucially important. And again, linking this up with the internationalism that we're all committed to. Bobby Sands, who was an Irish man who died fighting British imperialism. And he has a poem called The Rhythm of Time, which some of you might know. And it opens with, there's an inner thing in every man, and it carries on. He goes through slave rebellions in Egypt and the genocide of Native Americans, but it finishes with what this inner thing is. And he says, it lights the dark of this prison cell. It thunders forth its might. It is the undauntable thought, my friend, the thought that says I'm right. And again, I want to say for all of you who are in Labour and all of us more broadly, standing up in the face of this entirely confected and cynically manipulated anti-Semitism crisis, standing up and saying what we know to be true, and standing up for internationalism, anti-imperialism, the rights of oppressed peoples is the right thing to do. And history will sort of vindicate all of us in that respect. I also want to post in here because Loki has just mentioned it, and it is important. My colleague Nimar Sultani from SOAS has written an excellent article about Zionism and about how the IHRA definition and seeks to whitewash the crimes of Zionism and the history of it. So that might be worth a look for everyone there. So finally then, to introduce Crafty, Danny, as Loki says, who's written a very heartfelt and very poignant letter to Jeremy Corbyn, and whoever has greater technical expertise than me will click the play button on that now. Thanks again to Red Labour for organising this. Thanks to all the panellists, and solidarity to all of you fighting the good fight within the Labour Party.
Hi there. Can you hear me? Hi, Paul. Hey, thank you for the introduction. Yeah, big up Andrew, Loki, Pamela, Naomi, Howard, Justin, Jane, Paul for hosting. It's been absolutely brilliant. This is my song, which is called Letter to Corbyn. It's out on all platforms now. You can follow me on social media at craft_D on Twitter if you want to find the link. Yeah, thank you for all the support of the song, and big up on an amazing event. This is one of my first live performances in ages because of the world we're in, and this is Letter to Corbyn.
Thank you, Danny.
Hey. Yo. February 15th, 2003. 8 years old, I walked out with the biggest crowd in the street. You poured your heart into Hyde Park. We were wild with a speech. Opposed the war and defended the powerless powerfully. 15 years later, I met you. The man we've always known you are. No camera crew attached to you, just there supporting local art, showing heart. You spoke to everybody in the room. Then I turned on the telly, saw those topics in the news, cropping and chopping you into a sacrificial lamb. How they said you of all people were anti this and that. How it never stopped you carrying that Palestinian flag. The man we didn't deserve, but the man I wish we had. Could have been leader for years, if not for leeches, for peers and media smears, misleading people or feeding their fears. When we think of those dying, we cry the deepest of tears, knowing how much you'd have cared for them. Has that dream disappeared? No, because you changed a way of thinking, a collective state of mind. You elevated lives, I know you elevated mine, inspired belief into people who'd never raise a sign. And we'll see the fruits of your labor in a generation's time. The many in the streets who sang Let's Vote Labour took the fight to the front door from the echo chamber. You gave voices to the dead lives that never made the headlines. History will forget lies and paint you in the best light. And at the very least, this could be the learning curve. You changed politics from a dirty word for circle jerks. You were the early bird out here unearthing worms. Next time the words won't hurt, because we've already heard the worst. 2017 MPs in senior positions worked against their own party, seeking division. Cornered the cause, call it corporal punishment. 2.5 1,000 votes from forming a government. December 12th, 2019. I'm awake all night just thinking of the vulnerable people sentenced that day to die for 5 years of a prejudiced killer and callous ways of life. Next day I read Tommy Corbyn's letter and it made me cry. Thank you for empowering the people with empty hands. Thank you for believing we can dream of a better land. Thank you for being you and helping me be a better man. The best MP we ever had and PM we never had. Thank you, Corbyn, for all the hope you've inspired. Thank you, Corbyn, for showing us light and stoking the fires. Thank you, Corbyn. Sorry the country voted for liars. Thank you, Corbyn. Thank you, Corbyn. Thank you, Corbyn, for all the hope you've inspired. Thank you, Corbyn, showing us light and stoking the fires. Thank you, Corbyn, and sorry the country voted for liars. Thank you, Corbyn. Thank you, Corbyn. And just again, a massive, massive, massive thank you to everyone sharing the song. Like, I didn't think it would get as far as it has, so that's just mad. You can cut all of the flowers, but you cannot keep a spring from coming. Neruda. Thank you, Corbyn, for all the hope you've inspired. Thank you, Corbyn, for showing us light and stoking the fires. Thank you, Corbyn. Sorry the country voted for liars. Thank you, Corbyn. Thank you, Corbyn. Thank you, Corbyn, for all the hope you've inspired. Thank you, Corbyn, for showing us light and stoking the fires. Thank you, Corbyn. Sorry the country voted for liars. Thank you, Corbyn. Thank you, Corbyn. And thank you, everyone, and stay positive, keep fighting. Big up, thanks for having me.
Thank you, Danny. That was fantastic. And Danny, be too polite to say it, so I'll just say,
whoa,
get the single. Christmas is coming up. Send the link round. Get the single for everyone out there. Don't waste your money on useless so-called left-wing media and other stuff out there. Support people that are doing real work like that. Thanks again to Red Labour for everything. I don't know if Tina's on, if she wants to say it at the end, or if anybody from Red Labour wants to wrap up with a final word. No? We'll leave it there. Okay, comrades, thank you very much. And again, good luck to everyone with everything going forward. Bye.
Thanks, Paul. Brilliant sharing. Wonderful.
Yeah, superb, Paul.
Top notch.
Really enjoyed it. Great. Can we all cheer for Crafty now that we can unmute and go,
oh, Crafty.